Okay, is everything good on your end?
Perfect. I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly.
Excellent. You know, every once in a while there's a snafu. We just got to, you know, we have multiple options these days, which is a beautiful thing. We've come a long way.
Yeah, we really have. And I want to thank you again for obviously taking your time to do this. I know your father was like, he would always do the same thing. There was no one too small for him. I've seen like tons of his interviews on YouTube, starting with the real black ones.
Yes.
And then I found the YouTube algorithm just kept feeding me.
It's like it's a rabbit hole. There's so much there. I mean, my dad was 84 years old when he passed, but for 60 plus years he had a camera and a microphone in front of his face at all times, and he never denied anyone access. You know, so many celebrities, they reach a certain level, and you know, they put firewalls up, and you know, my father was proud, and you know, as one of the many Gregory children, there's 10 of us. Yeah. I'm incredibly proud to keep that, you know, keep that aspect of the legacy alive. And, you know, no platform's too big, no platform's too small. You never know how far reaching something you do or say today will be tomorrow. And that's always been, you know, that's always been our motto.
Yeah. And also, well, I just want to congratulate you guys on the documentary. And one thing I wanted to just say about the documentary is I've tried getting my friends like into like Dick Gregory videos, but a lot of times it seems there to be like a language barrier. It's like, maybe it's because there's so much context he's pulling from, right? From the 60s and his nutrition like phase that people, I guess, just don't understand what he's talking about. But there are a few who do, and like, as myself, like when we do like hear his, like adapt to his language, like we just gel right away. So I think the documentary is a good thing for people to like, you know, get started with Dick Gregory, and for those with ears that can listen to him will go down this rabbit hole. So I'm really happy about that.
It's that's an intelligent perspective to look at it. You know, there's so many, universally, there's so many language barriers, and part of, you know, part of technology, you know, there's silver lining to all of this. And part of it is that we're erasing some of those language barriers. But, you know, just like any book or any new language, you have to have your medical terminology or legal terminology. You have to have an index to basically understand the vernacular and the language. And without that, you're somewhat lost. And part of my excitement of being an executive producer on the one and only Dick Gregory, part of the joy in that is it helps to calibrate folks to you know, what this man's experience was and the lens that he continued to see life through. Although he metamorphed many times in his life, it allowed him to change his perspective, but he was always rooted in love and understanding and respect for humanity. So it really is a universal message. My dad's original, my dad had 16 books. His first autobiography, with the very colorful title. That book now is over 1 million copies sold. We just did 2 foreign language translations, so it's available now in Japan. It's available now in Croatia. We're getting ready to release it in Indonesia. This is a universal message, and it's important that people understand 1968 in America was really like a second Civil War. Many folks are saying that 2021 has shaped up. 2020 and 2021, you know, about 12-month period that doesn't align itself perfectly with a calendar year, was almost like an additional civil war. And these things ebb and flow in life, and then there's conflicts. And a lot of times when there's conflicts, we look back historically to look how those things were handled. And many times the best wisdom we get is from looking in the rearview mirror. I mean, as a Gregory, I pretty much am laser focused straight ahead and doing my part to improve upon humanity. But it's important to go back and take notes and to make sure we don't forget the past so we don't repeat it. And so the movie does a great job with that. Yeah. As you can see and can attest to, after watching the movie, when folks would ask many of us Gregory children what our father did for a living, it was hard to have an answer for. So the movie provides us a platform to do just that. And it's reaching folks all over the world, which is which was always our intention. Andre Gaines, who was just the brilliant director and writer, when he joined forces with Lena Waithe and joined forces with Kevin Hart in Showtime, we just knew that was a big enough platform for us to really be able to roll this out and allow the world to see the sacrifice and the service and the contribution that one man, with an amazing support system around him, my mother Lillian Gregory, was absolutely the cornerstone to Dick Gregory. But this is one man's work, and it empowers all of us to do more, quite honestly.
Yeah. Just also one thing I want to say about the documentary that I wanted to talk about today is I feel, obviously I think it was great, but there's one thing I wish they could have explored on a bit more is maybe your father's spirituality, because it's quite unique. And also I just want to say that one thing I love about your father is he got me back into spirituality. Like I reconnected in a sense with my spirit. And there's like 3 quotes I just want to say from your father, 3 of my favorites. The first one is you do the right things for different reasons when you're in order. The second one is God is real and God hears prayers. So anytime you carry something longer than 3 days, don't mean God ain't real. It means something wrong with your prayer. And the third one is his most famous one is fear and God can't occupy the same space.
Which is important. And a lot of people, and as Gregory's, as my dad would always point out, we don't get into isms and osms. That's other people's conversations. We were raised to be incredibly spiritual. We fasted and meditated as a family, and we understood the benefit of cumulative good energy and focusing and visualization. And, we get to a point as mammals with just these big brains that we start to think we're bigger than the universe. And, you look at some of the worst natural disasters, the animals are gone long before us humans are cued in on what's going on. We're looking at our quote unquote smartphones and everything else. The animals left a day or 2 before. We're not connected anymore. And it's important that we take a moment to ground ourselves. And my dad was yes, he was urban, but he was very grounded. I mean, he walked in nature every day. He took the time to respect nature. As a family, we would walk and pick up trash for hours, not for a pat on the back, just because we know that, this earth is like a spaceship. And as we're going through this galaxy, it's the only one we have. I mean, for quite some time, we've been researching, we meaning mankind, humankind, have been researching the other planets, and none of them seem quite hospitable to us. So we need to take better care of the one that we have. And so my dad understood that. He put a tremendous amount of time into making life. My dad was born in 1932. It was the worst point of America's Great Depression. Jim Crow laws still segregated most of the southern America beneath the Mason-Dixon line. And life was tough for him. It was very tough. And once he was in a position to change that, he made a decision that he was going to use all of his resources and all of his intellectual and spiritual capacity to make the world a better place, to reach out to the marginalized, to reach out to the forgotten. And, it's easy to do these days. My dad would always point out that at some point, as intelligent as you may be, you may have 3 doctorate degrees, you could go to, China today and an alarm could sound and, Mandarin Chinese. And if you can't speak it, suddenly you're not all that intelligent. And so he would qualify that we need to learn how to connect to people on a spiritual level. Laughter is a great example of that. And that's my dad used his tools as a comedian. Laughter is universal. I can look at a video and not even know the language that people are speaking, but just see the expression of joy and laughter, and it's contagious. And I'll smile just because I see them smiling and having a good time. So my dad first refined his skills as a practitioner through laughter. And then he realized, well, you're not going to laugh the world's problems away. And at the time, it was the heart of America's civil rights movement. Yeah. And that just, he didn't want to straddle the fence. Nowadays, you have a lot of celebrities, the LeBron James of the world, and all these that are part activists and still maintain their day job. Dick Gregory didn't want to do that. And so he jumped all in. He never looked back at being an entertainer again, although he was still incredibly funny. My dad and I went on, we became, best friends. We became business partners. We built 5 businesses together. So a lot of times people will hear me say Dick Gregory when I'm referencing my dad, but we were business partners, and no one wants to sit in a business meeting and keep saying dad or daddy. So as we became more peers, our relationship continued to grow and blossom. It became beautiful in the life cycle as it is. Once an adult, twice a child. As we get older, we all go through a second childhood. And it was just an honor and a privilege to stand by my dad during his second childhood. And I made a promise to myself. I never discussed this with him. It was just to me that his second childhood was going to be profoundly better than his first childhood. And it was. I mean, my dad, despite a lot of what you may have seen in videos, even when he was, giving people the blues and letting them have it,
Yeah.
he always ended with, God bless you, brother, love to the family. He always brought it back to being rooted in love and the fact that, no one who doesn't like you spends 10 hours with you. So, he could have left at any point, and he went back on those platforms over and over again. You mentioned Real Black, who my dad did his podcast regularly. Mike's a friend. He wasn't initially. We met through my dad. I had to give Mike the blues a bit because I felt like he was keeping an 84-year-old man doing too long of interviews. I said, treat him like CNN treats him. Get in and get out. But the truth is, all of that information Mike captured, it's now here in perpetuity. It's here for, folks like yourself, other young folks. And there's going to be a generational learning curve. And I learned a long time ago, people are ready to receive a message when they're ready to receive that message. You can lead a horse to water, can't force it to drink. So for you to introduce folks to Dick Gregory is great. But it may be 5 years, 10 years before that introduction becomes something meaningful for them. And my dad would also say, you tell someone something once, you're doing them a service. You tell them more than once, you're doing them a disservice. If you're smoking and they say, smoking's not good for your health, I tell you that one time if I'm your friend. If I tell you it multiple times, then now I'm being disrespectful because I'm assuming you didn't hear me the first time, and you did. So my dad would always say, tell someone something once in a meaningful way, and that's a service. To tell them more than once, it's a disservice. It means you don't respect the other things going on in their world, in their life, that may be leading them to do these things. So again, you can lead a horse to water, can't force it to drink. Dick Gregory's message is universal, and when folks are ready for it, I'm a retired chiropractor. For 25 years, I practiced in Washington, D.C., and I would have spouses come in and say, will you call my husband or call my wife? I want them to come in. I said, no, that's not my job. My job, I'm not an arm twister. I saw 45 patients a day. I was incredibly busy, 6 days a week. And I said, I'm here to serve folks who want this service. I'm not here to recruit folks. And that's always been my philosophy on Dick Gregory. When you're ready for this message, it's there. And my job as the executor of my dad's estate is to make sure all 16 of his books, all 12 of his albums, all of his lectures and interviews stay up there, stay available. My dad's book, Dick Gregory's Cooking with Mother Nature for Folks Who Eat, that book had become about $2,000 because it was out of print and people were selling it online. And that just was outrageous to us, Gregory. So we quickly went and connected with publisher HarperCollins and republished that book, because we don't want to, my dad would always say, if you want to hide something from an ignorant person, put it in a book. We don't want to hide things. We want to make sure that it's out there, that it's accessible. The physical books, the print books, the e-books, the audio books, all of that information is available. And quite honestly, there's something for everyone, depending on where they are in their journey of being, more in tune, more conscious, more spiritual. And a lot of times people hear spiritual and they kind of turn their nose up at it. And it's if you don't embrace the spiritual energy of the universe, you'll certainly get left behind. And we see that every day.
Yeah. I've been, well, to get back to spirituality, I've been exercising my faith a lot more because I feel like people tend to limit their happiness and what they want in the world. But like your dad's, like the best thing I think your dad's ever said regarding spirituality is he talks to God like it's his buddy. And I've been praying as you're like that since then. And some results are starting to yield, such as this interview. But one thing I actually
And
wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go right ahead.
One thing I was curious about was something I watched in the Rock Newman interview you had done with your brother Johanse. Joe Madison was on that panel as well,
Yes.
and he refers to an Africa trip all the Gregory children had done. I just
And
wanted
there,
to hear about that trip because I was in the future. My plan is to go to do like a big Africa trip. I don't know when, but it's in the future.
well, kudos to you. I encourage you to take that trip. Africa, the continent of Africa is just massive. You know, many times we talk about Africa as if it's a country, especially African Americans, because so few African Americans have been to Africa. Africa's massive. You could fit 7 of the continent of North America into that one continent. In America, they would always draw the continent of Africa not to scale. So it would be this small little continent. So when you go there and you travel and you just see just how vast and beautiful, you know, America's a big country. I can show you all the beautiful cities, or I could show you some of the rural areas where folks are not living that well. And that's what Western media has done to Africa. They show you the areas, they show you the strife, they show you the poverty without showing you the grandeur. And part of the reason that my parents would bring the Gregory children to Africa regularly was to ground us. And you know, we as my last name Gregory, my mother's last name Smith. Well, the Gregory and Smith are both slave names. Those are not our African names. And so it was important for our parents to bring us back and ground us and give us a sense of, you know, of all of the thousands of years, you know, the tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years that, you know, human beings have occupied this planet. Some would say invaded it, but occupied this planet. 6,000 of them of those years or so has been civilization similar in some aspect to what we read about in our history books. Well, for African Americans to spend so much time focused on 400 years of enslavement, which cannot be forgotten, but you don't trace back to you're bigger than that. And if you don't trace those steps back and, you know, go back and study about the empires and study about you know, we had a library at the Gregory farm that would rival the libraries of Timbuktu. If you don't go back and see, you know, Africa it's such a tremendous in size and culture too, because so much of the continent has been colonized by different cultures that has impacted the way of life, the way people speak, dialect, physical appearance. So when you go to South Africa, my first time in Africa was in South Africa, and although I had a marvelous time, I didn't feel like, hey, these folks look like me. And so and when I went to Harare, Zimbabwe, I was like, wow, what a beautiful country. Harare is a beautiful city. I made plenty of friends there, but I felt the same way. But when I went to Accra, Ghana, where Western Africa, where most of the American slave trade took place, in Nigeria as well, but that I saw my nieces, I saw my nephews. I said, that looks like my grandma, that looks like my grandpa. So it was a very visceral and different experience for me visiting Ghana. So many African Americans today, Stevie Wonder, Oprah Winfrey, have homes in Ghana because they feel that kind of full circle connection. And so I would encourage anyone, you know, there's so many incredible countries and cities to visit. But so as a family, my dad belonged to, it was the African American Leadership Summit. And every 2 years they would go as a group you know, sometimes 3 chartered planes. Many times Air Force Two was with us because there was a presidential delegation that would be sent. So it was always a big to do. I mean, we were met on the ground, and there was always bands and parades, and so it wasn't your typical visit to any country, but it allowed us to really see the hierarchy all the way down to just the you know, the people who really, you know, make things move. And us Gregory's always being connected to the ground, we would always divert on our own excursions to go and interact with and embrace the people. Now we have the internet. You know, before, this was before that time, and so now you can see and travel and experience these things, but that wasn't a possibility, you know, when we were children. So the trips were always colorful. My dad would always take over the PA on the plane system and do a routine the whole flight. There was lots of laughter there, and it just was something that it was beautiful to behold. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but my first time going to Ghana, we were flying, it was either Ghanaian Air or Air Ghana. It's now it's now a defunct airline, but I was in the back of the plane, and I was talking to the 3 flight attendants, 3 young ladies, and you know, it was probably 3 a.m. and just couldn't sleep. My dad and everyone else was asleep, and an older gentleman came back, and you know, I saw they had a lot of reverence for him. You know, he had like kind of a torn Irish knit sweater on, so I was cordial and kind, but you know, kept on with my conversation with the flight attendants, and he would chime in from time to time, and then ultimately, when you know, about an hour or so went by, he said, hey, he said, you know, excuse me, do you mind if we take a photograph before I return to my seat? I said, yeah, happy to. He took his sweater off, and I saw all of his bars and brass. He was the head pilot of the plane. And so I said, oh, I said, you didn't tell me, you know, you were he said, you didn't ask. And so I said, okay, point well taken. I should always ask who folks are. And so we posed for a photograph. I went back to my seat. We were approaching Accra, probably an hour and a half out, flying over the Cape Verde Islands. And so over the PA, the pilot says, you know, Dr. Christian Gregory, could you come join us in the cockpit? So I come up front, he introduces me. So here's this, you know, African pilot, you know, Ghanaian pilot, you know, Ghanaian co-pilot, and Ghanaian navigator on this beautiful 747. These 3, you know, highly trained, highly intelligent Black men are just masterfully, you know, controlling this aircraft. They pull down a jump seat for the ceiling, and they say, we want this to be your seat for the rest of the flight. So they strap me in, so I'm kind of hovering in kind of a harness vest jump seat as we slowly descend, and it's some of the most beautiful, you know, rainforest and forest and beaches. And as we approach and land, to see, you know, normally you have your small window seat, but to see from a, you know, 180-degree glass view of as you're returning to Africa. And it dawned on me, I said, you know, my genetic line left this country in the bottom of a slave ship, and here I am coming back, and this was probably, you know, 2002 or so, in a 747 being piloted by 3 African men, as I'm sitting here in a jump seat. And just to say, in a couple hundreds of years, just how things have changed so beautifully, and how much we've learned and how much we've evolved, and just what a experience that was for me as a Black man. And so I encourage, you know, I don't only identify with the, you know, transatlantic slave trade. It's important to understand that, but as a Black man, my experience is historically is so much bigger than that, and presently so much bigger than that. And it's important that we know, you know, Africans have not cornered the market on folks who atrocities have taken place to. As a human rights activist, it's important that we all fight for a better expression of life and a better experience of life, not just for all human beings, but for all living things. I mean, we really need to do a better job taking care of the folks, our our fellow residents of this spaceship that we call Earth, we need to do a better job making the experience and the expression of life better for all. And so I look forward to hearing about your trip to Africa when it happens. And I'm certain it will be magnificent.
I'm sure. And speaking about Africa, obviously Michael Jackson tried to capture that magic in a lot of his music videos, right? Even one of the titles I think is Liberian Girl. It's like one of my questions for you is, I know you guys like grew up on a farm in Plymouth, I think, Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Yes.
And I think the same interview with Rock Newman, you said that I think you guys met Marvin Gaye. He came to like babysit you guys for a bit when you were younger.
In
So
Boston, yes.
yeah, so my question is, did you ever meet Michael Jackson? Then I have two follow-up questions after.
Yes, Michael Jackson was like a son to my dad. And so I've met Michael Jackson more times than I can count. He called the house 2 or 3 times a week. Back then all we had was landlines. So typically one of us young Gregory kids running around and sweaty from playing hard would run in and grab the phone and immediately, recognize Michael's voice, chat him up real quick, and then let him know where our dad was, wherever in the world, give him the phone number or pass him through to my mom. One of the beautiful benefits of being one of the children of Dick Gregory is you could literally go to almost any musical concert you wanted to and just drop your name at the back door and immediately be ushered right in. So wherever I was in the world, if Michael Jackson was performing, I would do just that. Janet Jackson, the same thing. Marvin Gaye and my dad were just incredible friends. And Marvin Gaye was in Boston performing, and my dad took a few of us up to his suite. My dad had to run and do an interview. We were younger, and so Marvin was responsible. Here the man was preparing for his concert, but Marvin was responsible for babysitting us Gregory kids. John Lennon and Yoko Ono used to babysit us regularly when we lived in Chicago. So I was incredibly young then. My older siblings remember that. So no, the footprints of the Gregory legacy are quite deep and quite interesting for certain. So, but yes, Michael Jackson was a dear friend. He viewed my dad as his dad, as another dad.
Yeah. And so yeah, this is my follow-up question is I just want to quote Michael, and then I have a question for it. So he said in an interview as well, he said, "I will never stop helping and loving people the way Jesus said to." He said, "Continue to love, always love, bring on the children, imitate the children, not childish, but childlike." So in an interview, I'm going to repeat it, but you said we all have 2 childhoods, right? And when did your father like start his second? I know we touched on this before, but how do you tell when someone is beginning a second childhood?
So this is a great question. And, somewhat as big brain mammals, it's important we remind ourselves with all of our successes that we're mammals. We're part of the animal kingdom. I know people many times don't like that. We're mammals, 605 muscles, 202 bones. We're warm-blooded mammals. And so it's important to kind of understand that we all have a life cycle. And somewhere along that life cycle, we're a child. And I mean, there's 12-year-olds that are tragically are fighting in wars various places in the country. So where that line of demarcation of when someone stops being a child and becomes an adult is very gray. I mean, I was driving a car since I was 11 because we lived on a farm. And the average, an 11-year-old in New York City most likely is not driving a car. But I was a very good driver at 11. And so not everyone at 11. There's in America, typically 16 or 17, you get your driver's license. Well, there's a lot of 25-year-olds who still can't drive. So we have these kind of arbitrary, lines, periods to say, okay, now you're an adult, now you're a grown woman, now you're a grown man, now you can reproduce, now you can get married, now you can smoke, now you can drink alcohol, drive cars. They're not accurate. They're guardrails in life to help us to understand these things. So we pretty much will say, someone is a child until they're grown. Well, I had a beard when I was pretty much 15 or 16. I was going into liquor stores and not getting ID'd just because of my facial hair. So when did I stop being a child and become? So it's different. It's subjective. And so the same thing for our second childhood, but even more so. And let me explain that. During our second childhood, it's not like as we age, and most people, they get some age-related dementia. It comes with all these things, arthritis. It's not, oh, what did I do wrong? We have a shelf life. It's like a tire on your car. Even if you drive it responsibly, at some point the tire wears. It's just the nature of a tire. Well, the same thing happens to our organ systems. And so it's not like a snap of a finger. Sometimes at 15, a 15-year-old may do something that's very intelligent and adult-like, then they go right back to like throwing a tantrum. So same thing as our second childhood. The beauty of it is there's sometimes an elder is doing something almost childlike, and then they snap right out of it and tap into their frontal lobe, and they're telling you the most brilliant thing you've ever heard that's not childlike at all. So it's not, there's no rules to it. Someone could be, because people don't take care of their mind, body, and soul, someone could go through their second childhood in their 60s if they're not taking care of themselves, and someone else may go through it when they're 100, and some people never go through it because they check out before they've lived a full life cycle. But the life cycle being what it is and what it should be, our parents, we come to a point that we kind of become like equals, and then we're giving them advice, and it's almost like shared advice. Then it starts to be you're giving them a lot more advice, almost like you're the parent, you're the child. And it's profoundly important to be very respectful during that time period, because there's a lot, as we start to lose our mental faculties, it's important that, you can see some parents say, well, wow, that's a horrible parent. They're being way too aggressive with that child. But many times you see, seniors having their children being way too aggressive to them. And that's why my dad would always say, take care of your children, treat them lovingly,
Yeah.
because in most, for instances, they're going to be the ones that take care of you. And you won't like that when that comes full circle. So, so there isn't a definitive line of when that happened. I mean, you mentioned Michael Jackson. It was very clear in some of his later performances that, his capacities were diminishing, in which, if we go watch Michael Jordan at 80 years old, if you go there expecting him to dunk a basketball, shame on you. If he can even still dribble a basketball, I'm applauding and clapping my hands. So we need to kind of calibrate our expectations and understand that, I frequently say no country for old legends. People see legends and they just think, hey, there's Dick Gregory, he's 84. Well, I'm going to treat him like he's still 35. And that's a disservice. And some of the interviews my dad did, they treated him like he was 35 when it's 11-hour long interview. My dad will never say, I can't take it anymore. You could go 3 days. It's a sense of pride for him not to end the interview. So so we have to monitor, if you have a young child and you're teaching them to ride a bicycle, you make the decision when it's time for the training wheels to come off. You may take them off and need to put them back on again. The math is not linear. There's no rules here that say, at this particular point in life, this is what should happen. We have that for children. We have that, they're in the so-and-so percentile at a certain age. They should be able to track with their eyes. But some of the most amazing human beings just defied all of those percentiles. Maya Angelou didn't talk for 10 years and wound up being a masterful poet. There's Olympians that, were horrible runners, didn't walk till later in life, and went on to break and earn gold records and gold medals in the Olympics. So rules give us guardrails. They're not definitive. Some countries it's show me the man, I'll show you the rules. And I've always steered clear of those countries, and have worked for my lifetime and will continue to work for my lifetime to do the work that my dad did in leveling playing fields, leveling the fields that we all, reside on. So, but no, Michael Jackson had an incredible spirit, and just the stories are just tremendous. And to be in his presence, especially as he was, performing his craft, was a sight to behold, and not even behold, and experience. to live through. So it's wonderful. Long after these folks are gone, the good work that they've done continues to be highlighted and continues to move the needle. I say this all the time, and my dad said this in the documentary. You always want to highlight and show my bad, show my good. And so Dr. Heimlich, if we're together eating dinner and you start choking, and I'm going to do the Heimlich maneuver if it's appropriate. And the Heimlich maneuver may very well save your life. Well, if 10 years from now, research shows that Dr. Heimlich was a horrible human being, just a despicable human being, Dr. Heimlich was a Nazi, what we would then do is probably change the name, but we would still keep the good of that procedure and continue. We wouldn't say, now people just got to choke because Dr. Heimlich was a horrible person. So it's important, human beings, they do error, they do horrible things. And we should be able to calibrate and take the good. America's a nation of laws and order. Let the law and order side deal with the law and order side. That's above my pay grade. That's not, I'm not part of the criminal justice system, but you can't always tell me that that's what this foundation is. And then suddenly there's two sets of rules depending on who the person is. So I would say that, we need to extrapolate and highlight the good of humanity and let those who deal with the other side of it deal with it. But it shouldn't be all or none. It's a mistake to just erase people in history because at some point in their life they went on to do something or potentially did something, because I don't know. But whatever the case, we shouldn't erase the good. And I use that Dr. Heimlich example a lot. I don't know Dr. Heimlich, but I know that his technique has saved a lot of people.
I think it's very wise of you to say, because I'm sure you feel it as well. But today, people like to label people as good or bad, and we don't see the man as a whole anymore. So I think that's just perfect timing for you to say that. But if you don't mind, I want to read one more Michael quote, and then I have a question for it, but it actually has to do with your father.
Excellent.
This is in an interview I heard from Michael, and I think he was actually very emotional when he said this, and he was almost breaking down. He said, people don't even eat with their fathers anymore, their mothers. The family bond has been broken. It's an outcry for attention why kids are going to school with guns. They want love. They want to be touched. They want to be held. But they're busy off on their day job, They leave them at home on the computer and they're doing all kind of crazy stuff. That's destroying our world. We need to bond again. And my question for that quote is, how did your father keep the bond alive when he was traveling for 90% of the time, like you guys say in the documentary? And also, how did your mother keep it alive, that bond between her and 10 kids? Because it must be hard for one person at home.
So the simple answer to that would be love. Love. Love is universal. If your if your mother or father decided that to be an astronaut and they were going to go up and be in the space station for 6 months, you wouldn't feel abandoned. You would know where they're at. They're doing work for humanity. And that's what it was like for us Gregorys. We knew our dad was out on the front line. It wasn't like he was partying and at the bar overnight. We knew that, we were reading newspapers every day so we could monitor where he was at. He called and checked in. Like my dad would often say, Hitler had a mother and father at home. Jack the Ripper had a mother and father at home. Half the fathers and mothers, when they are home, they're not home. And so just being physically present is different than your presence. And although my father was gone a lot, his presence was always, it was an omnipresence. He was always there. It was always as if, even when he was gone, we'd feel like if we were doing something bad, he was watching. And he was so spiritual. There's times he would call and I would know based on what he was saying that he knew I had just did something, and I would just smile and laugh and saying, I think he's trying to let me know he's aware. And this was before there were cameras and all the other stuff that people have in their homes today. So he was just connected to the universe. He connected all 10 of us children to the universe. And we just, as odd as it may sound, we just communicated on universal frequencies. Many times we would sit and go a whole day where no one could talk. There was no spoken words. We would sit, we would meditate. My dad would kind of grunt to us. We'd grunt back. My mom and dad, when they would fast, they wouldn't talk. They'd grunt. My mom was a master Dick Gregory whisperer. She could take the most complicated grunt and decipher it and break it down and tell us what our marching orders were. So it was an understanding that it was, when my dad would frequently refer to himself as a soldier, a soldier for love, a soldier for good, not a soldier. He would always say he would rather die than to kill someone. And so when he would use that soldier reference, most soldiers are willing to kill and also be killed. Well, he was willing to be killed for the movement, that's for certain, and he was willing to die as an activist. So that would, and back to what you mentioned about the Michael Jackson quote, yes, I mean, there's a silver line. You said this yourself. We always look at good or bad. Life and people, we're spectrums, and sometimes we're on the good side, sometimes we're on the bad side, and we go back and forth like day and night. And so we should be remembered for the totality, but we should also be remembered for the individual good and or bad things that we did. So we oversimplify life. Many times you hear people say, is the glass half full, is the glass half empty? That's bullshit. The glass is refillable, fill it up. And so don't get caught up on too many of you don't see animals getting overly philosophical. They're doing the work, because if they're being overly philosophical, they get attacked. And so we have the luxury of comfort, economic abundance, in time. And sometimes that can allow us to move too far away from just from nature and the spiritual side of things. And so you can, as my dad mentioned, and my dad's conversations in prayer with God were always conversational. And he always made it very clear. And I learned this lesson as a young soccer player. My dad saw me, I had my shin guards on, my cleats on. I was getting ready, Plymouth Youth Soccer, getting ready for a big game. And he saw me sitting down on the dock by our house on the pond and meditating and praying. And when I, came out of it and stood up and turned around, he was sitting there quietly. And he said, my dad called me Doc and Champ long before I was a Doc and a Champ. So what were you praying for, Doc? And I said, Pop, I was praying that we win this game today. And he almost got a tear in his eye. And he said, if that was the prayer you just said, all this time that I've been teaching you about spirituality, I failed you. You should never pray for the outcome you want. You should pray for the outcome that the universe wants. Whatever's supposed to happen, allow it to happen. Pray that no one gets hurt. Pray that no one dies in their car or bus going or coming from the game. Pray that your body is watched over, your mind and your spirit. But to pray to win the lottery, to pray to win the game, that's a disservice and it's abusive of universal law. And that stuck with me. And I've never prayed that way again after that, of hoping for an outcome. I've asked things respectfully. If someone I love and is ill and dying, I may push the envelope of how I pray a little bit just to point out how important that person is to me. But I understand we're all part of something so much bigger than now, so much bigger than us. And the life cycle is not guaranteed for any of us. And that's why, we should live each day to the fullest and not take it for granted. And my life, quality versus, quantity versus quality, the quality of life that I've experienced, I might as well be 200 years old at this point, because I've just seen things and have done things that most people would never have the opportunity to do in 10 lifetimes. So I feel very fortunate. I don't take it for granted and for granted. And I feel as though it's my responsibility to pay it forward. But yes, now we have children and parents that are dealing with technology. And, we're not going to get this genie back in the bottle, nor am I suggesting it that we do. We need to find a way. We need to have rules. My business partners that had young children, I remember when they were getting ready to start getting them, smartphones, I'd say, treat people like business transactions. Make them sign a contract. Make sure they know that there's rules. Again, there's guardrails. The phone or the computer or the iPad it charges in the parents' room every night. So if you start them that way, you don't have to try to take it away from them when they're 15 because they'll burn the house down. So you have to control the router, unplug the router, shut off the internet. These things, I mean, there's so much. In growing up as Gregory's, we had encyclopedias, and that's where we got all our knowledge from. Well, by design, if something was printed 2 years ago, that's no longer news. It's no longer current. It's history. And so to now have these devices that allow us to real time be current, humanity should be able to move better. So there's a downside to automobiles. There was a downside to microwaves, to smartphones. And so it's up to us as humanity to highlight, and again, as my dad would say, show my good, show the good that this technology can do, and really utilize it to make the world a better place. And information is power. And if I can get the same information sitting here in Washington, D.C., as someone can get in downtown Harare, Zimbabwe, that's a beautiful thing. It's one more thing that's going to help to level the playing field, because not every household can afford, an Encyclopedia Britannica set every year.
Yeah. Also, one thing I think your father was really ahead of his time is the way he talks about the subconscious mind. And like one quote that I think that really stuck with me and got me thinking about the subconscious was, you see it on TV, all the TV shows, this conflict. How you gonna have a comedy that's a conflict 24 hours a day? And that's just something I just really wanted to point out, because I think that people are starting to, well, I'm sure the marketing people understand the subconscious because that's how they target us, right, to sell product.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, but I
The
feel
conflict,
like there's
that's what it is.
yeah. And yeah, obviously, if you see it all the time, you hear conflict, that's what's going to manifest. But just like your father was doing to you by calling you doctor long before you were one, he's like training your subconscious in a weird way.
Prophetic. Yeah, it's I mean, they used to refer to my dad in the 60s and the 70s as being a mystic, because they considered anything that was outside of the norm spiritual wise, oh, well, you must be a mystic. There must be something strange or something dark around you. And, as we hear people talk about opening their third eye and connecting and seeing, without using their optic nerve. And, so much of what we see is not what we see with our eyes. It's what we experience. It's what we know is fact. You can look at something from far away and say, hey, that's hot, that's cold, that's danger. And it's something you've never even seen before, but you can still, it registers in your mind, danger. My dad would always say, all of the wisdom and knowledge you will ever need in life, you were born with it. And so we complicate things because man created, intelligence, and design IQ tests and scores to say you're intelligent, you're not intelligent, you're intelligent, which is BS. It's this, and then then they can charge you for it. That's the only way they can justify making you charge. And we get these degrees. Some of the best doctors in the world never went to medical school. Some of the best lawyers in the world never went to law school. And so these there's a show, television show with Mos Def, a movie with Mos Def, Yassine Bey, based on a real story, called Something of the Lord, Something the Lord Made. And it's this gifted surgeon, and that Yassine Bey plays, and he never went to medical school. He just was a natural at understanding anatomy and physiology. Some of the most, wise nutritional information I got were from people who had no nutritional training. They just were passionate about it, and they studied it on their own, and they experienced it, and they shared that knowledge. And the other thing that's important is biochemical individuality. Biochemical individuality. One person's medicine is another person's poison. We have to stop shaking our finger and say, only eat this way, only eat that way. We have to listen to what our body says. Broccoli is great and nutritious unless you have a raging allergy to it. So we have to take the time and stop wanting people to tell us everything, but take the time to do the research. And not all research is sitting in a chair with your arms on the side and reading it. It's experiencing it. And if every time you eat a certain thing, you feel bad after it, you should probably eliminate that from your diet and the things that you eat, and you fit. If every time you go up and to get gas and you put the gas grade they tell you to get, if your car runs terrible, try a different grade. If it runs better, use that grade. You don't have to go get a PhD, you know, in physiology, and you know, and become a mechanic, a master mechanic, to understand your car is running better. And our bodies are the same way. And a lot of what we consume, we think of just what we eat, but it's also what we put on our skin, what we allow into our ears, allow into our eyes, allow into our brain. Consumption is all consuming, and we are a totality of what we consume.